Have you ever watched, like, a master debater just totally dismantle an opponent on stage?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Right. You know the exact kind of scene I'm talking about. You're sitting in the audience or maybe watching a viral clip on your phone, and the rhetorical footwork is just dazzling.
It really is. The punchlines land perfectly, the opponent is stammering.
Exactly. And the crowd is just roaring. In that moment, you walk away thinking you just witnessed the construction of this, like, invincible fortress of logic.
Right, it feels completely airtight.
It does. But then maybe hours or even days later, when the adrenaline wears off and you're, driving to work or washing the dishes, you start really thinking about
You
it.
start picking it apart.
Yeah, you start poking at the underlying premises that were established during that debate, and you realize that underneath the polished, confident surface, there might be massive structural cracks.
Like the whole thing is built on sand.
Exactly. You realize the whole thing might actually be built on sand.
I mean, that is a remarkably common experience, especially today, in our current era of digital media. We tend to consume intellectual debates, more like combat sports than genuine philosophical inquiries.
Oh, 100%. It's all about the knockout.
Right. We get caught up in the performance of certainty, the speed of the delivery, the visceral thrill of that rhetorical dunk, rather than examining the architectural integrity of the worldview actually being presented.
Yeah.
But once you train your eye to look for structural integrity, for the actual load-bearing logic of an argument, rather than just the rhetorical flair, the entire landscape of public debate completely shifts.
It really does. Suddenly, arguments that sounded absolutely devastating in a 30-second soundbite start to look, well, incredibly fragile.
Very fragile.
And that shift in perspective, that trained eye for structural integrity, is exactly what we are exploring today. Our mission for this deep dive is highly specific.
Very specific.
We are analyzing a synthesized, detailed critique of the debate framework and worldview of a very well-known atheist debater, Matt Dillahunty. The source material we have in front of us is this dense, rigorous examination outlining 6 central weaknesses in his approach. But before we get into the weeds, I want to make something crystal clear to you, the listener.
Yeah, this is a crucial point.
As your guides today, our goal is absolutely not to take a side in the massive, centuries-old debate of theism versus atheism. We aren't here to endorse this critique as absolute truth, nor are we here to defend the subject from it.
We're just looking at the blueprints.
Exactly. Our job is to impartially explore the arguments presented in this specific source material to understand exactly why the author claims these specific errors are structurally and logically fatal to his worldview position. We are simply looking at the mechanics of the critique itself.
Yeah, treating this critique like an architectural inspection report of a building is probably the best approach.
I like that analogy.
Because the source is claiming that this particular worldview doesn't just have a few cosmetic flaws, a broken window here, a creaky floorboard there. It is arguing that the load-bearing walls themselves are fundamentally compromised. So our task is to walk through this report and examine the structural logic, the causality, and the philosophical mechanisms that the author claims lead to a total collapse of the free morte from the inside out.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start by looking at the rules of the game itself. Because when you enter any debate about the fundamental nature of reality, the very first thing you have to establish is how you define what actually counts as evidence.
Right. You need a playing field.
Right. And this brings us to the first major structural crack identified in our source material. The critique calls it the epistemological double standard. Now, before we dive into the double standard part, I need you to translate that jargon for me.
Sure.
What exactly do we mean by epistemology in the context of a live debate?
So epistemology is simply the branch of philosophy concerned with the theory of knowledge. It asks questions like, how do we know what we claim to know? What justifies our beliefs? In a debate setting, your epistemology dictates what kind of evidence you will accept. And according to the source, Dillahunty applies a hyper-strict, exhaustive evidentialism to any theistic claims.
Meaning he wants hard proof.
Exactly. If an opponent claims a non-physical reality exists, like a deity or an objective moral realm, he demands physical, empirical, scientifically testable proof for it.
Oh, wait, if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, well, okay, but isn't demanding physical evidence just the standard scientific method?
Sure, yeah.
I mean, science works. We use it to build airplanes and cure diseases. Why does the source claim that asking for empirical proof is a fatal flaw?
Well, asking for empirical proof for an empirical claim is perfectly rational. If
Yeah.
someone claims, a new species of bird exists in the Amazon, you should absolutely demand physical evidence.
Right, like a photograph or DNA.
Exactly. A feather, anything physical.
Yeah.
The source's critique is not that empiricism is bad. The fatal flaw, the why behind this critique, emerges when he is pressed on his own foundational assumptions.
Oh,
When an opponent turns the table and asks him to physically prove his own starting points, things like the reliability of his own senses, the existence of a real external world outside his own mind, or the validity of logical induction, he excuses them.
wait, really? How?
He calls them necessary pragmatic axioms. He does not apply his own hyper-strict evidential standards to his own starting points.
Oh, wow. Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. To put it in everyday terms, it's like a referee in a basketball game declaring that the opposing team must scientifically prove that gravity exists before every single jump shot they take.
That's a great way to picture it.
Right, like they have to pause the game, get out a whiteboard, and run a physics experiment on the court just to justify throwing the ball.
But the referee's own team.
Yeah, the referee's own team gets a free pass. They can just shoot the ball without any equations because, well, assuming gravity works is a necessary pragmatic axiom to play the game of basketball.
Right.
How can a worldview survive if its foundational rules apply to everyone except the person making them?
What's fascinating here is the absolute necessity of a level playing field in any rational discourse. If you and I are going to debate the nature of reality, we have to agree on the rules of engagement.
Of course.
By demanding empirical proof for the metaphysical claims of his opponents, while shielding his own metaphysical assumptions under the umbrella of pragmatism, he creates an asymmetrical battleground.
It's totally skewed.
Yeah, and logically speaking, a worldview cannot survive this hypocrisy because it destroys the mechanism of truth-seeking. Let's really look at what an axiom is.
Let's do it.
An axiom is a starting point, a premise that is so evident or well-established that it is accepted without controversy or question. It's the ground floor.
Right.
In philosophy, trusting your senses, believing that the tree you see in front of you actually exists and isn't just a digital hallucination and matrix-like simulation, is a massive assumption.
Because you can't prove your senses are reliable without using your senses to do the proving.
Exactly. The circularity is unavoidable. You cannot empirically prove that your empirical senses are reliable without relying on the very senses you are trying to validate.
If it makes a lot of sense.
And the same goes for the problem of induction, which is a massive philosophical puzzle. Induction is the assumption that the future will resemble the past.
Okay.
We assume that because the sun rose today, it will rise tomorrow. We assume that because gravity kept our feet on the ground a second ago, it will do so right now.
Right. But you can't prove that.
No, you cannot logically prove induction without relying on past experiences, which is using induction to prove induction. Every human being, regardless of their worldview, has to start with these massive, unprovable axioms just to get out of bed in the morning and function in reality.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, the critique isn't saying that having axioms is the problem. Every worldview has to have a ground floor.
Yes.
The critique is saying that the hypocrisy of how those axioms are treated on a debate stage is what causes the structural collapse.
That is the core of the first argument. The source argues that Dillahunty allows himself these massive, unproven, non-empirical starting assumptions so his worldview can function.
Right.
But when a theist attempts to treat basic metaphysical realities, like the existence of a necessary uncaused cause or the fundamental intelligibility of the universe, as justified philosophical premises or starting axioms, he slams the door.
He just shuts it down.
Yeah. He demands empirical physical evidence for something that is, by definition, non-physical. He denies his opponents the very philosophical grace he grants himself.
I can see why the source calls that fatal. I mean, if you destroy the level playing field, you aren't actually debating anymore. You are dictating terms.
Precisely.
You are basically saying, my unprovable assumptions are pragmatic necessity, but your unprovable assumptions are irrational nonsense.
Yes.
If you protect your own foundations from the very skepticism you weaponize against others, your argument isn't winning because it's inherently stronger. It's winning because you've rigged the rules of the inquiry before anyone even opened their mouths.
A worldview that relies on special pleading, which is the logical fallacy of demanding an exception for yourself that you deny to others, is fundamentally irrational at its root.
And when your root is irrational.
Everything that grows from it is structurally compromised.
Wow. Which naturally leads us right into how this rigged system actually operates in practice. Because if you set up a double standard for what counts as knowledge, you inevitably trap yourself in a logical loop.
You do?
You build a conceptual cage around your own mind. Let's look at how this plays out during the actual investigation of evidence, with what the source calls presuppositional imperialism or circular naturalism.
It's quite a mouthful.
It is, and I really want to understand the mechanics of this loop.
Well, this specific point is a critique of methodology. It's asking, how does a person actually go about investigating claims about reality? The source points out that Dillahunty typically presents his approach as that of a neutral, open-minded investigator. The persona is essentially, bring me the evidence, I will look at it objectively, and I will follow where that evidence leads no matter what.
I mean, that sounds incredibly reasonable. Honestly, it sounds like the gold standard for intellectual honesty.
On the surface, yes.
So where does the source say this breaks down?
The fatality occurs because his methodology explicitly mandates that only physical, scientifically testable data is permissible as evidence. He is using what philosophers call methodological naturalism.
Hold on, you just dropped another heavy term.
Sorry about that.
No, it's good. But before we move on, unpack that for me. What is the difference between methodological naturalism and just, regular naturalism?
That's an important distinction. Philosophical naturalism is the belief that only the physical universe exists. There is no God, no soul, no supernatural realm.
Okay, so that's a belief system.
Right. Methodological naturalism, on the other hand, is a rule of investigation. It says, when we study a phenomenon, we will only look for natural physical causes.
Oh, I see.
Science relies on methodological naturalism. If a doctor is trying to cure a disease, they are looking for a virus or a genetic mutation. They aren't looking for a curse.
Right, obviously.
The problem, according to the source, is that Dillahunty conflates the two on the debate stage. He takes a tool designed to measure the physical world and uses it to declare that the non-physical world doesn't exist.
Ah, I see. It's like trying to weigh a poem on a bathroom scale.
That's a perfect analogy.
Imagine taking a piece of paper with a beautifully written sonnet on it and placing it on a digital scale. The scale registers a tiny fraction of an ounce.
Right.
Then you say, okay, now I want to measure the meaning of the poem or the beauty of the metaphor. The scale registers absolutely zero.
Because it's not physical.
Exactly. The scale is built only to measure physical mass. But if you then turn around to an audience and confidently declare, I have objectively and neutrally investigated this poem, and my scale definitively proves that its meaning and beauty do not exist, you aren't being neutral at all.
Not at all.
You used an instrument entirely incapable of detecting the thing you were supposed to be investigating.
That is a perfect visualization of how methodological naturalism collapses into philosophical naturalism when handled improperly. The source is asserting that this is a fatal methodological error because it strips his framework of its claimed intellectual openness.
Because the game is rigged again.
Exactly. By defining acceptable evidence strictly as material data, he rules out transcendent or immaterial reality by definition before the investigation even begins. It creates a self-confirming loop.
Let's dig into the actual mechanics of that self-confirming loop. Like, if I'm debating him, how does that loop function against me on the stage?
Well, if his foundational premise, his presupposition, is that only the physical universe exists, then his methodology will naturally dictate that only physical evidence is valid.
Okay, tracking.
So if you, as the opponent, bring up a philosophical argument for a non-physical reality, say the existence of the abstract laws of logic, or the argument that the universe must have a transcendent cause outside of space and time, this methodology allows him to dismiss your argument entirely.
Just throw it out.
Right, and not because your argument is logically flawed or mathematically incorrect, but simply because it doesn't fit into his predetermined category of physical evidence.
So his conclusion is completely baked into his premise.
Yeah, exactly.
He's basically saying only physical evidence is valid because only the physical world exists, and we know only the physical world exists because we only accept physical evidence. That is dizzying.
It is circular reasoning par excellence. The source uses the term imperialism because this approach attempts to colonize all of reality with one highly restricted method of knowing.
Imperialism, wow.
Yeah, it forces every aspect of human experience, every philosophical inquiry, to answer to the scientific method, even questions that the scientific method was never designed to answer.
It's like a guy walking down a beach with a metal detector, claiming to be doing an exhaustive, completely neutral inventory of everything on the shoreline.
Right.
But he ignores the plastic bottles, the seaweed, the driftwood, and the jellyfish, simply because his machine only beaks for metal. And at the end of the day, he confidently announces to the world, I have objectively proven that only metal objects exist on this beach.
And if you point out the seaweed right next to his foot, his response, dictated by his methodology, is, well, my machine didn't beep, so that doesn't count as evidence.
That's crazy.
The fatality of this approach, according to the critique, is that it completely destroys the very concept of an open-minded investigation. The outcome is rigged from the start.
You can't even play the game.
You cannot claim to be a neutral investigator of the question, does God exist? If your methodology defines the word evidence in a way that automatically excludes God a priori, you haven't investigated the claim at all. You have merely asserted your own worldview by definition.
This is starting to paint a very precarious picture.
Very.
So the source argues that his external rules of evidence are broken. The playing field is tilted by a double standard, and the methodology is trapped in a circular loop. But what happens when we take this worldview and apply it internally?
This is where it gets really deep.
Right. What happens when we apply this strict, unyielding materialism, not just out there to the universe, but internally to the debater's own mind and the minds of his opponents on the stage? This brings us to a massive collision.
It really does.
Point 2 in our source material highlights the clash between materialism and rational agency.
This is perhaps one of the most profound structural critiques in modern philosophical debates between naturalism and theism. We are moving from how we measure reality to the nature of the mind doing the measuring.
Let's break down this internal contradiction, because the source spends a lot of time on it. Dillahunty is a materialist.
Correct.
In this worldview, everything that exists is physical matter and energy interacting according to the blind laws of physics. There is nothing else.
Nothing but atoms in the void.
Right. That means human thoughts, choices, and beliefs are not the product of an immaterial soul or a free-floating consciousness that exists independently of the brain. They are ultimately determined by prior physical causes.
Like neurochemistry.
Yeah, neurochemistry, biology, environmental stimuli, and evolutionary wiring.
The philosophical term for this framework is determinism, or, more specifically in this context, materialistic determinism.
And here's where it gets really interesting. If materialism is entirely true, his entire public platform, his whole career as a public debater, is fundamentally at odds with his own reality. His platform relies on a constant, passionate call for people to freely evaluate evidence, change their minds, and act as morally responsible agents. But if we are just, for a lack of a better phrase, highly evolved meat computers reacting to chemical stimuli, how can a debate even happen in the first place?
This raises an important question regarding the coherence of his entire enterprise. Let's look at the actual physics of determinism.
Okay.
If materialism is true, every single thought you have is the inevitable, inescapable result of the physical state of your brain in the preceding microsecond.
So I have no choice in it.
Exactly. And that state was caused by the state before it, stretching all the way back through a chain of physical causality to the Big Bang. In a strictly materialist universe, your belief in atheism, or an audience member's beliefs in theism, is no more a free choice than water boiling when it hits 212 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, wow.
It is just physics playing out its inevitable course.
So, if I am sitting in the audience, and I believe that 2 + 2 = 4, in a strictly materialist universe, I don't believe it because my rational mind freely apprehends the abstract truth of mathematics.
No.
I believe it because my physical neurons were caused to fire in a specific pattern by my neurochemistry.
That is the logical consequence of the framework. And the person sitting next to you who believes 2 + 2 = 5 has neurons that were physically caused to fire in a different pattern.
Neither of us is choosing it.
Right. Neither of you arrived at your conclusion through a free evaluation of evidence. You were determined to hold those specific beliefs by the physical laws of the universe.
I'm struggling to see how a debater justifies this internally, because if that's true, the entire concept of a debate becomes completely absurd. Aren't both debaters just vibrating on stage to the tune of their neurochemistry?
It becomes a pantomime.
Yeah.
It is a chemical reaction yelling at another chemical reaction, demanding that the other chemical reaction alter its fundamental laws of physics.
That's hilarious and terrifying.
The source identifies this as a fatal structural error, because the framework undercuts its own reason for existing. If human cognition is merely blind, unguided physical processes, then the concept of rationality itself completely collapses.
Because rationality requires freedom.
Exactly. Rationality, by definition, requires the ability to freely weigh evidence, to recognize logical validity independent of biological survival, and to choose the conclusion that corresponds with objective truth. If your thoughts are dictated by chemistry, not logic, then you cannot trust your own thoughts to be true. You can only know that they are chemically inevitable.
Wow. So when a materialist debater gets visibly frustrated with an opponent on stage and says, "You aren't being rational, look at the evidence, change your mind,"
Yeah.
they are demanding something that their own worldview explicitly says is impossible.
They are acting as if a rational agency exists, while aggressively defending a worldview that destroys the possibility of rational agency.
It's completely contradictory.
The source argues this internal contradiction is fatal because it renders the entire exercise meaningless. Every argument he makes on that stage, every appeal to logic, every demand for intellectual honesty is ultimately borrowing from a worldview where minds are free.
He's borrowing it.
Yes.
Right.
He is relying on the existence of free, rational minds to make his case, while simultaneously arguing for a universe where free, rational minds cannot possibly exist.
It's like a software program getting angry at another software program for having a bug and demanding that the other program use its own free will to rewrite its own code.
That's a great way to put it.
It's completely incoherent. And this inability to ground human agency naturally bleeds right into another massive vulnerability identified by our source.
The moral side of things.
Exactly. Because if you can't justify why a human mind can freely reason, you're going to have an equally hard time justifying why a human life has objective worth. This brings us to the ethical vacuum and the concept of borrowed capital.
This is where the metaphysical debate hits the very real, visceral ground of everyday human experience. We are moving from the realm of the mind into the realm of ethics and morality.
The source outlines a very stark, almost jarring contrast here.
Yes, it does.
On one hand, Dillahunty is widely known for passionately championing objective human rights. He advocates strongly for bodily autonomy, moral duty, and social justice. He frequently expresses deep, genuine moral outrage at the ethical systems presented in biblical texts, condemning them as objectively wrong.
He's very vocal about it.
Very vocal. But on the other hand, as we just discussed, his worldview posits an accidental cosmos, governed purely by blind physical laws and the brutal process of natural selection.
The blind, pitiless indifference of the universe, to borrow Richard Dawkins' famous description.
So what does this all mean for morality? I want to challenge the source here for a second.
Sure.
Can't someone argue that evolution gives us morality? Like, we evolved empathy because it helps our species survive. Why isn't that enough to ground his moral outrage?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we run headlong into the classic is-ought problem.
Okay, what's that?
It was first articulated by the Scottish philosopher David Hume. It is a massive hurdle in moral philosophy. Hume pointed out that science and empiricism can only tell us what is.
Right.
It can describe the physical universe. It can tell us that human beings have evolved to feel empathy, or that certain cooperative behaviors help our species survive and propagate.
Okay, making sure I follow.
Right, so science tells us what happens. But science can never logically bridge the gap to tell us what we ought to do. Survival is a biological instinct. It is not a moral duty. There is no physical law of the universe that says surviving is objectively good.
Because in a purely physical universe, a human being, a rock, and a plant are all just different arrangements of atoms.
Exactly. There is absolutely no objective reason why the human arrangement of atoms possesses intrinsic moral dignity over the rock's arrangement of atoms.
Wow, okay.
Natural selection operates on power, violence, and the survival of the fittest. It does not operate on concepts like inherent rights or bodily autonomy. Those are entirely human constructs.
So if I understand the source's critique correctly, in a strictly materialist universe, saying murder is objectively wrong is no more factually true in a cosmic sense than saying, I don't know, chocolate ice cream is objectively the best flavor.
Exactly right.
Both are merely statements of biological preference or societal conditioning.
That is the inescapable conclusion of strict materialism. If human beings are just cosmic accidents, temporary arrangements of stardust with an expiration date, whence comes this concept of absolute human worth or universal justice?
Where does it come from?
Right. If morality is merely a byproduct of evolutionary biology designed to help us survive, then morality is entirely subjective and malleable. If a different set of behaviors helped us survive, our morals would be completely different.
And here is where the concept of borrowed capital comes in, which I think is one of the most powerful analogies in this entire critique.
It's very striking.
Think about a bank account. It's as if he is writing massive million-dollar moral checks from an account that his own worldview says doesn't even exist.
Fountain checks left and right.
Yeah. He is funding his intense moral outrage against religion using the very concepts he is actively trying to dismantle. The source explicitly points to the historical theological framework of the Imago Dei.
The image of God.
Right, the idea that humans are made in the image of God. In Western thought, that is historically the foundation for the concept that human beings have inherent, unalienable dignity regardless of their utility or survival fitness.
And the argument being made by the source is that he is smuggling these transcendent moral concepts into his atheistic worldview because he desperately needs them to function in the real world.
He needs them for the debate stage, too.
Absolutely. He needs them to formulate his moral outrage on stage. But his actual stated worldview provides absolutely no grounding for them. He has severed the flower from its roots and is carrying it around, insisting that the flower is self-sustaining.
But eventually, a flower without roots withers. You can't just pretend the roots aren't necessary.
The source believes this reliance on borrowed capital is an eventually fatal position in a rigorous philosophical debate. You cannot leverage objective moral outrage against a biblical text if your own worldview explicitly states that morality is just a subjective illusion generated by evolutionary biology.
Because it's just your preference against theirs.
Exactly. If morality is truly subjective, then his intense outrage on stage is really just his personal, biologically determined preference clashing with the ancient cultural preferences of a Bronze Age society. There is no objective high ground for him to stand on.
Wow.
Surviving on borrowed worldview capital, using the theistic foundation of objective human value while simultaneously denying theism, is structurally incoherent.
So let's take a breath and recap the sheer scale of what we've covered so far, because the structural damage outlined in this source is compounding rapidly.
It's building up.
We have an epistemological double standard that tilts the rules of evidence. We have a circular methodology that defines evidence in a way that excludes immaterial reality before even looking at it.
Right.
We have a materialist framework that accidentally destroys the very concept of free, rational thought required to have a debate. And we have an ethical vacuum writing checks it can't cash, relying on borrowed capital to justify its objective moral outrage.
The foundational pillars of the worldview, how we measure reality, how we reason within that reality, and how we value human life within that reality, have all been identified by the source as fundamentally compromised.
Which naturally leads me to ask, if the foundation is really this fragile, how on earth does the structure stay up during a live 2-hour debate?
It's a great question.
How does someone with these fatal philosophical flaws maintain the appearance of winning to an audience of thousands?
Stagecraft.
This is where the critique shifts, right? From analyzing the philosophical foundation to analyzing the actual tactical maneuvers used on the stage to avoid detection. Let's look at how he handles the presentation of evidence by his opponents, a tactic the source calls methodological reductionism and the cumulative case dodge.
This is a fascinating shift in the critique, moving from abstract philosophy to the practical mechanics of stage debate.
According to the source, instead of evaluating Christianity, or theism in general, as a unified cumulative worldview, Dillahunty routinely fractures the evidence.
He chops it up.
Right. He isolates individual arguments. He takes the philosophical argument for cosmic origins, the argument from the fine-tuning of the universe, the existence of consciousness, the reality of objective morality, and historical evidence, and he chops them up into completely separate pieces.
And then what does he do?
He then demands that each single point, completely on its own, prove the entire existence of the Christian God, or it gets thrown out entirely.
To understand why the source claims this is a fatal methodological flaw, we need to explore the nature of a cumulative case. Because understanding how cumulative evidence works is fundamental to how human beings determine truth in almost every complex field of inquiry, from law to history to science.
Okay, explain that a bit more.
A cumulative case relies on the convergence of multiple, independent lines of evidence that all point toward the same overarching conclusion.
Think about a murder trial. Let's really map this out for the listener.
Sure.
Imagine a prosecutor standing up in court and saying, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I have the suspect's fingerprint on the victim's doorframe." Now, I will admit this fingerprint does not tell us his motive. It does not tell us where he bought the weapon, and it does not capture the murder on video.
Okay.
If the defense attorney instantly stood up and yelled, "Objection! A fingerprint doesn't prove a motive, therefore the fingerprint fails to prove murder, and we must throw it out of evidence completely," the judge would laugh them out of the courtroom.
It would be legally and logically absurd.
because the fingerprint was never intended to prove the whole case by itself. It's only supposed to prove he was at the scene. That's one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
Then the prosecutor adds the motive. He was in debt. Then they add the murder weapon found in the trunk of his car. Then they add the threatening text messages sent the night before. None of those individual pieces of evidence, isolated by themselves, prove the whole murder.
No single piece does.
But together, when you look at how they converge, they form an interlocking web of probability that removes reasonable doubt.
And the source is arguing that complex worldview claims operate the exact same way. They are vast, interlocking webs of evidence. The philosophical argument from the origin of the universe, a cosmological argument, isn't designed to prove the specific historical claims of the resurrection of Jesus.
Right, it's just one piece.
It is only designed to point to a transcendent, uncaused cause of physical reality. The moral argument is designed to point to an objective moral lawgiver. Historical arguments are designed to point to specific events in time.
So they all have different jobs.
Exactly. By utilizing methodological reductionism, by demanding that, say, the cosmological argument prove the entirety of the Christian doctrine of the Trinity, or else it is declared invalid, Dillahunty isn't actually defeating the theistic worldview.
I'm struggling with this a bit, though.
Oh, really? How so?
Shouldn't a debater be allowed to analyze one argument at a time? I mean, it's debate. You have to break things down. You can't just talk about everything all at once.
Analyzing them one at a time is necessary for clarity. Nobody's disputing that. Demanding that each piece independently bear the weight of the entire worldview is the fatal dodge.
I see.
The source claims this is a fatal weakness because a debate framework that requires fracturing and distorting the opponent's case in order to defeat it is not an intellectually robust framework. It is a defensive maneuver.
Like a smoke screen.
Yeah. If you refuse to evaluate the interlocking web of evidence as a whole, you are shielding yourself from the actual cumulative force of the argument.
Yeah.
You are swatting away individual puzzle pieces one by one and loudly claiming that the overall picture doesn't exist simply because no single piece shows the whole image.
He's refusing to engage with how the worldview actually operates in reality.
Yes.
And if you refuse to engage with the actual structure of an opponent's argument, if your entire strategy relies on constantly isolating and swatting away individual puzzle pieces, you have to rely heavily on stagecraft to maintain the momentum and the illusion of winning.
You have to distract the audience.
You have to control the environment so the audience doesn't notice the puzzle pieces being ignored. Which brings us to the final structural flaw identified in our source material: sound bites over substance and the over-reliance on rhetorical control.
This final point moves us fully away from pure philosophy and deeply into the psychology and mechanics of public debate, particularly how it functions in the modern digital era where, content is king.
The source asserts that in live debate settings, Dillahunty relies heavily on controlling the cadence of the dialogue. He dictates the rhythm of the conversation.
Right.
He frequently uses forced binary choices, demanding a strict yes or no answer on highly complex, multi-layered historical or theological questions. And if the opponent tries to provide nuance or tries to explain the historical context, he uses rapid interruptions, raising his voice to maintain dominance and control the pacing.
This raises an important question that we have to answer to satisfy the mission of this deep dive.
What's that?
Why is this specific tactical approach considered a fatal intellectual flaw by the source rather than just an aggressive stylistic choice? I mean, many debaters are aggressive. Why is this structurally fatal?
Well, the critique argues it is fatal to his intellectual credibility because this rapid-fire, interruptive style actively avoids deep engagement with classical theological traditions. The text specifically mentions giants of philosophical theology like Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and modern Reformed epistemology.
Before we go further, it's worth briefly touching on what those represent. Thinkers like Aquinas developed massive, logically rigorous systems of metaphysics.
Heavy hitters.
Yeah. And modern Reformed epistemology, championed by philosophers like Alvin Plantinga, rigorously defends the idea that belief in God can be entirely rational and properly basic without needing scientific proof, much like our belief in other minds or the past. These are intricate, deeply fortified intellectual systems.
Instead of engaging with that depth, the source claims this rhetorical style targets simplistic caricatures or fundamentalist outliers. It preys on opponents who aren't equipped to articulate the nuances of classical theology.
Right.
And I want to pause and ask you, why does this work so well for digital audiences, yet fail entirely under philosophical scrutiny? Doesn't forcing a yes or no on a multi-layered question guarantee a false answer?
It's the difference between digital soundbite rhetoric and classical philosophical engagement. We have to consider the medium. Live debates, especially those clipped for YouTube or TikTok, heavily reward aggression, speed, and the perception of dominance.
The algorithm favors the dunk.
Exactly. A forced binary saying, answer yes or no, does your God condone the violence in this specific ancient text, is rhetorically devastating in a 30-second clip. It traps the opponent.
But philosophically, you can't answer a complex theological question about ancient Near Eastern socioeconomic structures or the progressive revelation of morality with a simple yes or no without instantly misrepresenting reality.
Complex truths require paragraphs, not syllables. The source argues that by relying on rapid interruptions and cadence control, he prevents those paragraphs from ever being spoken.
He just cuts them off.
Yes, he keeps the dialogue permanently trapped in the shallow, turbulent waters of rhetoric, preventing it from ever reaching the deep, calm waters of philosophy. And targeting fundamentalist outliers, debating someone who holds a very shallow, unexamined, or highly literalistic version of their faith, allows him to tear down the building without ever having to face a master architect.
It's easy to knock down a sandcastle.
Very easy.
It's much, much harder to knock down a cathedral. And the source is essentially saying his entire stage persona relies on aggressively kicking over sandcastles, while turning to the audience and claiming he has proven that cathedrals can't exist.
And that avoidance exposes the ultimate weakness of the framework. According to the source, a truly robust worldview should actively seek out the strongest, most formidable version of its opponent's arguments.
Right, steel manning.
Exactly. In debate, it's called steel manning, building your opponent's argument up to its strongest possible form before you try to defeat it. If your primary debate strategy relies on avoiding Aquinas, ignoring Plantinga, and instead demanding yes or no answers from someone who isn't equipped to explain the nuances of classical theism, then your framework is reliant on theatrical control rather than a genuine, rigorous pursuit of truth.
It's just a show.
It becomes a performance of intellectual superiority, masking a deep avoidance of intellectual depth.
Man, when you pull all of these threads together, when you step back from the stage and look at the whole picture, you really start to see the immense scale of the critique this source has synthesized.
It's a lot.
We aren't just talking about a debater missing a point here or there, or having a bad night on stage. We are looking at a detailed argument for total structural collapse.
That is the core thesis we were tasked with exploring, and what is vital to understand is how these 6 points are inextricably linked together. They feed each other.
How so?
Well, the epistemological double standard requires the circular naturalism to function without being challenged. The circular naturalism leads inevitably to the internal contradiction of determinism.
Right.
The determinism creates the ethical vacuum, which requires the borrowed moral capital to keep the debater functioning in society. And because the philosophical foundation is so compromised by all these internal contradictions, the debater must rely on methodological reductionism and rhetorical stagecraft to maintain the appearance of an impenetrable, logical fortress on stage.
They aren't just minor debate fouls. Together, they represent fatal structural errors that collapse the framework from the inside out. It's a fascinating look at the anatomy of an argument and how easy it is for any of us to be swayed by the surface-level rhetoric, the charisma, and the speed of delivery, while completely missing the crumbling foundation underneath.
It serves as a powerful reminder for anyone engaged in intellectual inquiry, regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on.
Oh, totally.
We must always interrogate the premises. We must ask, are the rules of evidence being applied equally? Does the worldview account for the reality of human experience, including our ability to freely reason and our intrinsic value? Is the method of investigation genuinely open to where the evidence leads, or is the conclusion rigged from the start?
As always, our goal on this deep dive wasn't to tell you what to think about Matt Dillahunty or atheism or theism. Our goal was to give you the tools to look closer, to not just watch the debate, but to inspect the architecture of the arguments being presented to you. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on that incredibly striking concept of borrowed capital. We've explored the source's claim that this highly aggressive atheistic framework relies heavily on concepts stolen from the theistic worldview it attacks.
Right.
But push that idea just one step further into the dark. If a worldview can only survive by borrowing the moral dignity, the rational agency, and the very concepts of objective truth from the opponent it is actively trying to destroy, can it actually be said to exist on its own at all?
That is the big question.
Or is it ultimately just a shadow cast by the thing it opposes? Keep questioning. Keep looking beneath the surface of persuasive rhetoric. Until next time.